The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Doug McKelvey is a man of mystery and a writer's writer. He's written novels, screenplays, television scripts, song lyrics. I'm sure I'm leaving something out. Most recently, he's been writing liturgies. If you don't own at least one copy of his book, Every Moment Holy, well, you really should. I wanted to start with the idea that I've heard you talk about on a couple of occasions, and that is the idea of the phrase you use, in I can't remember where it was that I've seen it, but it's the idea of a word that rhymes with everything.
Yes.
Am I saying that right?
Yeah.
Tell me about that. I mean, what do you mean? You speak of writing as a way of in terms of finding rhymes with reality. Is that a fair way to put it?
Yeah, I think so. I probably first came up with that phrase when I was struggling to get a novel written, which is usually when I try to write a novel, I do struggle with it. And sometimes it's easier to switch genres just as a trick, to trick myself into writing something.
Yeah, right.
That if it's not the thing I have pressure to write, I'm more likely to be able to use the pressure of the deadline of the thing I need to write, and let that come out sideways in some other form of expression. That then sometimes is able to put me in the creative brain space where I can come back and actually get some writing done on whatever project it is that I actually need to be working on. So I think it was one of those times, and I needed to be working on a novel, and instead I started writing a stream of consciousness sort of poem. And the poem was about the writing process and the struggle with that. And I didn't know where the poem was going to go, but ultimately it kind of, it had its own momentum and found its culmination in this idea that when we're writing, what we're doing is casting these lines out there. We're venturing to travel to the end of each of these sentences. And what we're actually doing is writing a poem where we're setting up rhymes and trusting that we're going to find a resolution when we get to the end of this process, or that we're going to be met by some resolution, and that resolution somehow is going to have to be something that rhymes with everything, that rhymes with everything that came before it. So that might have been the first time, or one of the first times that I played with expressing that kind of idea in that way. Actually, it might have been initially through subjects with objects. I think that was probably actually the first time I phrased it that way, which was Subjects with Objects is a collaborative art and poetry project that I do from time to time with a painter in Nashville, a painter-animator named Jonathan Richter. And so I had taken one of his paintings, and that was where it took me. But you can edit all that out if you want to.
Yeah, okay. So you're talking about the idea of launching into a sentence or a work or is it, we talking about at the sentence level even, to say I'm launching into this sentence trusting that maybe I don't know what I'm writing about yet, but as I venture into that, something's going to happen.
For me, certainly there are some times when I venture into a story, and then even down to the level of a sentence. You start it. At least for me, I don't tend to think incomplete thoughts, which is why you've heard the term "face made for radio."
Right.
Well, I don't think that I have a thought process made for podcasting.
Yeah, right.
Because I have so many pauses mid-sentence, because I'll get out the first part of the thought, and that's all I have so far, and then I'm reaching for, okay, where is this going?
Yeah.
What's the resolve of this sentence? And in the same way, when I'm writing, oftentimes I will take so many runs at a sentence because I get the first part of the thought down, and then it can be this laborious process of, okay, what's the next? Where does this lead? What's the next logical or the next poetic aesthetic phrase, or where is this going? And only when I get to the end of it finally and can put the period on that sentence can I then step back and look at it and say, okay, is this working? Is it working on every level?
Yeah.
In terms of meaning and aesthetic, and then adjust it from there. But yeah, I think it's part of why writing is a paralyzing process to me so often, is because I'm afraid of that unknown, even down to the level of a sentence. Yes.
But okay, but it seems to me we're talking about a walk of faith here, so to speak, that a trust that if I launch into this, because, well, you tell me if you think this is true. Does everything rhyme with everything? Anyway, in some sense. In other words, if I launch into this thing, I'm going to find what it rhymes with, although it may not be on the first try.
I would say yes, with some caveat, because I think that everything that is true rhymes with everything that is true. Or maybe we could say everything that is true, good, beautiful rhymes with everything that is true, good, beautiful.
Yeah.
So certainly I think there are ideas we could express that, whether it's the aesthetic level or the level of morality or theology, where we experience a dissonance in works of art that we encounter, whether it's writing or a movie or whatever it might be, because we recognize that's not lining up with reality, with what I know to be true. That's not, this is elevating what is degraded, rather than, elevating what is good and right and commendable. So so all things as they should be do rhyme with one another, right? But our ears become trained, and our consciences become trained to recognize that dissonance, whether it's on a conscious or just an intuitive sort of level of something's not right here. Something's off in this piece of work. It's not.
When you say our consciences or whatever is trained, who is our?
Well, I guess I'm speaking in terms of hypothetically,
okay,
and ideally, that if we are seeking to understand better what is true, what is good, what is beautiful, what is a scriptural worldview, where is history going, what has God said, how has He defined for us, what our present reality is in this world, and our future hope. And then I think we can extend it beyond that to say that for those who are following Christ and seeking to be submitted to His Spirit and His truth and the effect of the Spirit of God, convicting us of sin, of error, and pointing us toward the glory of Christ and the truths that we would want to conform or to be conformed to, that we would surrender to that process. So I guess I just gave a very shorthand and abstract initial way of expressing all of that, but those are the directions I would go to unpack that.
I think of you now, not so much in your liturgies, because in your liturgies you're submitting yourself to some very to another way of writing, but in your fiction, I think of you as being very inventive, and yet inventiveness, the way you talk about writing, when you speak of rhyming with everything, it feels like you're talking about words that conform with some exterior, not words, but ideas, things that conform with something outside the work, right? So that the work itself it's not inventive in the sense of you're actually inventing another world or a new reality. Let's say not inventing a new reality, but conforming to a bigger reality. To what extent is invention just a matter of conforming to something that was invented not by us?
And people listening couldn't see me nodding along to a lot of what you're saying, but
or your look of fright.
Well, let me before we try to explore that, let me give a little more expansive answer to your earlier question, because I think this all ties together. But as I began to think about that idea of things that are good and true and beautiful rhyming with one another, I began to look at the story of redemption as revealed in Scripture in those terms, and really began to see God as a poet in a way that I hadn't before. Because you begin to look at elements in the Old Testament, like the sacrificial system, the Passover, the scapegoat. You begin to look at all of these things as rhymes that are being set up in a poem, and then there's this tension of what could possibly rhyme with every one of these things. What if you put yourself back into an Old Testament eschatology, and kind of try to forget about the New Testament, as a thought exercise, and put yourself in the place of the Hebrew people back then, and these words that the prophets are speaking, that they don't even understand what the fulfillment is really going to look like of some of these things. And in addition to things like the sacrificial system, you look at, God's nature is revealed as being just.
Yeah.
I mean, his being cannot act in a way that is not just. And his holiness has been, offended by the actions that human beings have taken, by the rebellion of human beings. And yet he's also merciful, and he is loving. And how in the world are we going to resolve this poem, the rhyme scheme, when it has to rhyme with justice and it has to rhyme with mercy? And it has to be a perfect rhyme with both of those. And then, of course, Christ is that, that final rhyming word at the end of the poem, that suddenly that rhymes with everything that came before it. I mean, the fulfillment of God's justice, of his mercy, the fulfillment of the sacrificial system, the scapegoat, and it's so I became more and more enamored with this way of viewing, the story of redemption, but also looking at works of art through that grid. And now to take it more to the question you just asked, I think there's the rhyme scheme that's set up with the worldview, with the morality, the theology, the effect ultimately that this work is going to have on the reader, the viewer, the listener. Is the net result a redemptive one, or is it going to be something that leads people to a place, to conclusions, to emotions that don't open that space for them to move into a redemptive movement through that work. But you also have the same thing paralleled on an aesthetic level. And so the idea of a work of fiction being inventive rather than derivative, which, realistically, most works are going to be both, because none of us are reinventing the wheel, even if we're trying to play with words in a new way. It's not really going to be a new way. It's all about the influences that we've consciously or subconsciously chosen to, well, not subconsciously chosen, but consciously chosen or subconsciously been impacted by. But I think the task for us in relation to that becomes that even when we're at our most inventive, the work within itself still has to have that internal consistency. Aesthetically, the elements have to rhyme, right? And when they don't, that's when works are clunky.
So it has to rhyme internally, and to what extent does it have to rhyme beyond itself? I'm trying to get at the idea of reality, right? The extent to which a work, besides being internally consistent, to what extent does it have to be consistent to some reality outside itself?
I love layered works of art. And I love for things to be, if someone else has created something, a book, a piece of music, a film, there's nothing that makes me more excited about engaging with that work than if it is so thoughtfully layered that I know I'm never going to get to the bottom of all of it.
What's a work that you have that's that layered?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is just because it's, a week old to me. And that is my son-in-law's band, The Arcadian Wild, just released their new record. Mm-hmm. And there's this song that Isaac wrote about his own experience, and it's called Civil War. And there's so much depth of thought to the musical composition and the interplay of the movements of the music with the lyric mm-hmm. and the meaning that's being expressed there, that I just, I'm driving, I'm just listening to it on repeat. Because I know that, I'm not a musician. I don't know music theory. But, most songs, as I listen to them, I know where the song is going to go. I know the mm-hmm. kind of the 4-chord, I can hack around on the guitar with chords, and I can guess where the song is going to go next. This song, I can't guess it, but it feels so much like my own internal, conflicts feel. And it's just, I'm just amazed at his ability. He's so fluent. His musical vocabulary is so large. Uh-huh. Let me put it that way, that he can create phrases and paragraphs that
musically,
yes, that I recognize I don't even understand completely what he's doing. It's like reading Cormac McCarthy.
Yeah,
right. It's like that was a stunning, beautiful paragraph that Cormac McCarthy just wrote.
Yeah.
I don't know why it works.
Uh-huh.
I don't know what the grammar is. I don't know why it works. All I know is that it's beyond me, and there's a power in it, and it's again to the idea of layering. That I like to know that something has been so thoughtfully created that no matter how much I explore, and I could spend some years researching music theory and trying to get a better grasp on it, but I know I'm not going to get to the bottom of all the choices that Isaac made in mm-hmm. creating that one song.
Yeah.
So
yeah, again, it sounds like you're talking about a kind of, in that particular song. I haven't heard that song yet, although I'm going to go listen to it now. You're talking about something that you don't know how this is going to rhyme with itself, and then it does.
Right.
So now this is a podcast about writing and the writing process, and so any thoughts on how do you make that happen? Maybe may not be the right word, but how do we move toward that kind of complexity, that kind of how do we move toward the kind of layering that you're talking about in the writing process? To what extent do you think that Isaac, for instance, understood what he was doing? Does Cormac McCarthy know exactly what he's doing when he writes these paragraphs that you and I don't know how he did that? Did he know how he did it?
I don't know.
Yeah, sure.
I think that Isaac does know what he's doing, but I think Cormac does as well, but it's not necessarily something we can articulate, right? Mm-hmm. Because I mean, we've learned the parameters, when we're in elementary school, hopefully of grammar, of that kind of structure. But that all of the influences that we take in, the things that as we encounter them, the works of art that fire our imaginations and that we are shaped by some part of it, certainly we lose track along the way. We never have anything like an exhaustive knowledge of how we're formed and why we resonate with the things that we resonate with and what came from where ultimately.
Yeah. So we can talk about the leaf mold of the mind where everything just goes in and goes in and goes in.
Right.
And then it what's the word? Not rot, but the
mulch.
It mulches, it composts to where the pieces aren't recognizable anymore, but it's something rich. Yeah. That can give birth to something.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that is a really good description of the process of how that happens. So I think when we're creating, it becomes, for most of us, it becomes this organic thing where we just feel our way through it.
Yeah.
And we have an instinctive sense of whether the direction we're going, what we're creating as we're creating it, whether it's rhyming, internally, aesthetically, with the larger body of, whatever that particular piece is. And so my guess is that for Isaac, I mean, all of the music theory that he's assimilated, just becomes a language that he now speaks, that he doesn't have to think about, I think I'll, go to the minor third here or, whatever it might be. I think he's able to translate the emotional movement naturally into the musical expression. And I think it would be the same for Cormac McCarthy, that the cascading poetry of his images thrown up against one another and kind of exploding like fireworks on 4th of July, all against one another in the finale. That I don't think he thinks about it. I think he just has that sense of whether it's staying on track with that internal consistency. So. Yeah.
And one thing I've heard you talk about more than once is the idea of getting to a point, and this is when you're talking about fiction. Maybe we need to wrap up here in a minute, but I don't know the extent to which this applies beyond fiction. But you talk about reaching a point in the writing where the story starts to take on its own life, where it's beyond what you had planned for it, it's beyond what you were hoping for it. It's just sort of doing its own. I don't know if doing its own thing is the right way to put it, but I mean, so many writers I talk to, what we love best about their work, they don't quite know where it came from either, and yet to get to that point where the work is doing things beyond what you can do yourself, in order for that grace. I mean, it feels like grace. I don't know any other word for it, but to reach that point, you've actually got to somehow be in the habits. You got to be doing the work to make room for that grace, for that external work to express itself. I don't know, and so I've been thinking in terms of liturgy, because you're now kind of the liturgy guy, and so as we enter into liturgy, we are going through some motions in the best possible sense. We're going through some motions that say, reminding ourselves of what's true. We are forming habits, making a place for these truths that are expressed in the liturgy to flower and to become true, or to become true subjectively. These objective truths can become true subjectively in our experience. And I think you and I have talked before about the idea of writing habits, and when you are consistent in doing that work, whether you feel inspired or not, just the fact of being in the chair and doing the work makes room for the inspiration to come. And I see some important connections there between liturgy and just the liturgies of writing, the habits of writing.
Yeah. I think for me, part of why writing is a paralyzing prospect frequently is because there's that recognition that if that doesn't happen, that mysterious transaction where it seems like, somehow I've been met by grace in the writing process, and the whole has become more than the sum of the parts, which I think we could also describe as finding that rhyme.
Yeah,
or that rhyme that rhymes, the word that rhymes with everything within the story becoming apparent, suddenly emerging. And I think for me, in my experience, that is synonymous with that moment when the story takes on a life of its own.
Yeah.
And typically I'm wrestling with a story, trying out different pieces here and there, and rewriting parts, and I think maybe it's going to go to this place, but it's when it suddenly goes somewhere different that I did not anticipate, and it happens in the moment when I'm writing that part. And then I suddenly realize how inevitable it was, how everything actually was leading to and setting up this moment, and I couldn't see it till I was in the middle of writing it.
Yeah.
And maybe not even in the first draft of it. It might be the fifth draft or the sixth draft when suddenly that thing happens. And then from that point, writing is a different experience. Then the struggle is to keep up with the story. I'm chasing it, trying not to lose it. It's like you're running down a game trail after the mythical white stag that you think you winged it, with your first arrow. But then it darted off into the brush again, and you're running down the game trail trying to get another sighting of it and trying to ultimately, bring it down.
Yeah. But as you said, that grace doesn't intervene every time you sit down.
No.
And if it were in our control, it wouldn't be grace anymore. Right? If we knew when I sit down today, this is going to happen. Yeah. We've got to open ourselves up to that possibility and put ourselves in that position, which is, I think, also what your liturgies do in the. I say your. Is that the right word? Your liturgies? Maybe we should say our liturgies that you wrote, that you were the vessel for, whatever. But we don't have any control over that. But all we have control over is I can sit down today and I can do the work, and maybe this is the day that moment of grace is going to occur.
Yeah. I mean, it parallels a lot of other things in our lives and our experience. Yeah. Right. Just that sometimes all we can choose to do is be present, and to bring our weaknesses. Yeah. Because I think when we see things most clearly, we see that what we're bringing is not so much our skill. It's our willingness to bring our weakness and our inability, and to offer that up, and to say, use this if you will, in whatever way you would.
Yeah. Great. Well, Doug, thanks so much for being here. This has been a lot of fun, and hope we get to do it again soon.
Thanks, Jonathan. Oh, wait, I had something else I wanted.
Too late.
The Rabbit Room has partnered with Lipscomb University to make this podcast possible. Lipscomb has graciously given us access to their recording studio and the Center for Entertainment and Arts building. We're so grateful for their sponsorship, their encouragement, and the good work they do in Nashville. Special shout out as well to the Arcadian Wild for allowing us to use their delightful song, Finch in the Pantry, as part of this podcast. Check out their album of the same name for more excellent music.
The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
This podcast was produced by The Rabbit Room, a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to fostering Christ-centered community and spiritual formation through music, story, and art. All our podcasts are made possible by the generous support of our members. To learn more about us, visit rabbitroom.com, and to become a member, rabbitroom.com/donate.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.